Hello again. We've had a few lessons this week, haven't we, missing our co-op? We are starting our fifth essay, and we are in the invention phase. Remember that there are three canons of rhetoric. In other words, there are three phases of writing that all writers go through. Your invention stage, your arrangement stage, and your elocution stage or style stage. And so we are starting on Essay 5, the invention, and we've been working on ways to invent our ideas, things to think about to come up with our ideas. And we are using the 5 common topics. We've been looking at comparison, and now we're jumping in to definition. And so this week is our invention phase, and we'll add the element of definition into our interesting part of our Annie chart. The second week, we're going to work on arrangement, and then the last week, we'll work on elocution. I wanted to show you what the end of the road is for this class. A persuasive genre where you're arguing or trying to persuade somebody to think about a certain topic in a certain way has a particular outline. And by the end of the year, this outline you see on the screen, you will have all those pieces. We'll have added all those pieces to our papers. We are slowly adding a section or two at a time through each essay. What we've already learned is the introduction, the exordium, which the modern word is hook. The narratio, we haven't gone into full form yet, but it's basically background information. We've learned how to take our thesis, and our thesis is our claim and the 3 proofs or support we're going to give for that claim. And we've learned in the body how to break each paragraph into each proof and then have sub-supporting ideas that support that proof. We've also learned in the conclusion so far that we restate our thesis first, but in a different way. We give a summary of our proof, and we list the 3 proofs that we had talked about in the meat of our paper. The amplification we've kind of discussed. I didn't mark it as completely done because we're going to go over a little bit more. But the amplification part of the conclusion is the so what. Some people call it a clincher. Some people call it a bold statement or thought. But you're amplifying your thesis. So to amplify your thesis, you're asking, well, to whom does this matter? So who's your audience? Basically, who are you trying to convince? Who does this matter to? And then why it matters. So that's the part of amplification. What we have left to learn is the narratio or the background, the division, and the distribution. These things in pink we're going to learn this week, so I'm not going to go into any detail in it in this video. Later on, we're going to add the refutation part where we refute the counter argument, okay? And I won't go into that during this lecture too, but I wanted you to see the big picture of where we're going. And by the end of the semester, the end of this class, you will have all the pieces of the puzzle to write a wonderful persuasive paper. Today, we're on the introduction phase, the invention phase of our 5th essay. And we're going to focus on our 5th essay in the invention phase with the topic of definition, one of the 5 common topics. The second week, we're going to look at arrangement, and like I said, you're going to be introduced to division and distribution and added to your outline in your paper. And then the last week during the elocution phase, we're going to learn about antithesis and how to use it. But today, let's focus on invention. Now, we need to know our issue for our essay for the next 3 weeks, and our issue is going to be this: whether algebra is essential for life and therefore a needed requirement for high school and college. This has become quite a controversy lately, and so I took this off the headlines and thought this would be very relevant to you and something that we could persuade on one side or the other. In Praxis, I gave you several background articles, the pro and the con, for or against. I gave 2 in this slide just to show you that they are in Praxis, but they are links, and I believe there's about 4 of them, maybe 5. You can pick others that you want to use, but these were just to help you save time in looking for the background information. Okay, remember our invention strategies. The first strategy is we start asking critical questions of our issue. We use those 5 common topics. The first topic we've already gone through is comparison. The topic we're going to go over this week is what? Definition. Then you research and you get your background information. During the invention process, after you've gained valuable information and had thought-provoking questions, then you start to map and cluster those ideas. We use the Annie chart for that, where we affirm, negate, and then things that are interesting go in the third column. The other thing I've recommended is that you keep a commonplace journal. That's where when you run across anything, ideas, quotes, topics, that you write them in this journal and you make personal explorations or reflections on those ideas or issues. And you respond to those cool quotes that you find from various sources. This is what all the great thinkers of previous generations have done, and it's a great exercise. So I want you to continue to do that, even though I don't assign it as homework. It'll be something you'll thank me for later. Quick review of the 5 common topics. The topic of comparison, which we've already been through. The topic of definition, which we're about to go through. Then the rest of the 3, we will go through the rest of the semester. Topic of circumstance, topic of relation, and topic of testimony. So definition is pretty much what you think. It's defining your terms, defining those key words in your issue. A lot of times we start with a dictionary definition. Then you need to go beyond that, though. You need to start asking, what group of things does this word belong to? What kind of thing is this word? And what are some concrete examples of this word? To be more specific, I really want to make sure you understand some vocabulary about definition. First is the term. Anything we're going to define is the term. And the term is those naming words or phrases. So book is a term. It's a word that means a thing that has spines and print. That's the term, okay? So book would be the term. Now, the genus is the category or groups to which the word belongs to. And when you start to write your own definition, which, listen to me if you're not, this is very critical. Most of debate and persuasion centers around the definitions of words. And just to rely on a Webster dictionary takes the power out of your hands. Being able to define your terms is key to a persuasive argument. The next is species. That's the members of the group to which the term belongs. So you have the term, you're finding out what categories or groups this term can fit into, and there's definitely usually more than one. And then within one of those groups, what are the members of that group besides the term you're looking at? That's a species. Little different than science. And then the last word you need to know is differentia. So once you've listed the members that are in your little party, your group, then you look at your particular word and say, okay, I know it fits in this group because it has these similarities, but what's unique about it? What makes it different than all the others in this species? That's the differentia. Why is it so important to use definitions as one of your common topics when you're persuading? I've already mentioned this, but just to sum up, if you think about it in your own personal life and you really reflect on when you've had conflict in your life with somebody, a friend, a family member, if you really stopped and reflected on it, a lot of times those conflicts come from misunderstandings of a word, its definition, or you have two definitions for the same word, and they aren't lining up together. Let me give you some examples. If I came up to you and said, "My brother is always beating me," we could have a conflict. It could start a gossip chain because our definition of beating may be two different definitions. You may be thinking physical abuse, and I'm talking about every time I play him in a game, he is beating me. Okay? Here's another example. The mouse was under the table. Again, if I don't define what mouse is, we could have a misunderstanding and a conflict because you may be thinking, holy cow, you have mice in your house and they're running under your table, when what I was talking about was the mouse that's used with a computer. So it's very, very important to define your key terms in your papers and in your discussions with others. In order to communicate effectively for the kingdom of God, we've got to start at the word level and make sure that the words we're using, the definitions are the same for the receiver who's receiving the message and you, the messenger. So how do we do this? Well, here's the steps, basic steps to defining your terms for persuasive pieces. Once you've come up with an issue, you're going to maybe even start your background and then start developing your what affirms it, what negates it. And through that process, you're going to start highlighting or jotting down those key terms, those things you know you need to define. More times than not, you really need to define the key terms in your issue itself. And we'll talk more about that in a minute. The next thing you do once you've picked the word you're going to define is now you're going to identify 3 or 4 groups that this term can belong to. And you're just basically, you ask yourself, what kind of thing is it? And it will fall into different groups. The third step you're going to take is now that you've got a list of groups, now you select the one group that seems most helpful for the issue you're focusing on. That's the one you're going to focus on. Now you're going to go and start listing the species in that group. the other members of the group that belong in there, that have similarities, the species of that group. As you do that, you want to jot down number 5, the common characteristic that all the members or species of that group has. So what quality do they share? Then you do the opposite. Then you look at your term in that species, the one you're trying to define, and you think of what makes this term different from the other terms or members in this group or species. And then last, you're going to write your own definition. You have all the information to do that by combining the term, its group, and its unique characteristic. And that seems a little abstract, especially if you're not used to defining your own words. So let's look at some examples. Let's go back to the Lion and the Witch and the Wardrobe, and we've been focusing on Edmund. And our issue has been whether Edmund should have followed the White Witch. So we're looking at our issue, and it's going to be very important to define Edmund. So that's the term we're going to pick. Now let's start thinking of some groups that Edmund could fall in. Well, he's human, so he falls in the group humans. He's also a boy character in a book, so he falls in that group. He was a king, so he falls in the group of kings. He was a brother, so he falls in that group as well. And he was a nephew, so he falls in that group as well. Notice that even some of these groups you choose not to pull, the group you choose, the ones you don't pick to use, they're great sources to go back to your comparison and start comparing, thinking about other kings and maybe comparing Edmund to another king in history. So this is a great tool even to fall back to comparison. All right. Well, our issue is whether he should have followed the White Witch. So we're talking about a fictional book, and we're focusing on the characterization in that book. So the group that we should choose that would be good would be boy characters in books. So let's start thinking of some classic great boy characters in books that fit into this group, boy characters. What are the species that fit besides Edmund? Tom Sawyer, Huck Finn, Jim Finch, Harry Potter. All those are great species to fit into our group. So what does our next step, we look at those common characteristics, right? So what does Edmund and Tom Sawyer and Huck Finn, what do all these in this group, what common characteristic do they share? Well, all of them go on adventures. All go on a journey of discovery. Edmund's going through a big one, right? And all of them are fictional. None of them are real. So now we have some common characteristics. So now what do? We've found the commonality. Now let's find what's dissimilar of Edmund from Tom Sawyer and Huck Finn and those. The unique characteristic. Well, none of the other ones are in the Chronicle of Narnia. Edmund is. And none of the other ones are from the author C.S. Lewis. So one of the unique characteristics of Edmund is he is in the Chronicles of Narnia and he's from C.S. Lewis's imagination. Last, now we have all the pieces to create our own definition. You might as well just call us Webster, because here we go. We're going to state our term, and then we're going to make sure we list what group he's in as the first part of our definition, and then the unique characteristic. So we would say something like, Edmund is a boy who is a fictional character in C.S. Lewis's Chronicles of Narnia. Okay? Let's do one more for practice. Let's go to a historical figure, somebody real. Let's do George Washington. Why did we pick George? Well, our issue was whether George Washington was a significant president. So looking at that issue, president would be a good term to define, and George Washington would be a good term to define. So we picked George Washington. What groups does he fall under? Well, he was a general, so he falls under the generals. He was a president. He was a gentleman, and he was a huge landowner. Here's our groups. Now, which one of those groups really fits our issue? Well, since the word president is in our issue and the group is presidents, that would probably be a good group to choose. So now we have our genus, our group, presidents. Let's pick our species, our individuals we're going to put in that group. Who else were presidents? Thomas Jefferson, Woodrow Wilson, Abraham Lincoln, Donald Trump. Those would be good ones. What's common about all of them? These are the men who made significant changes to the United States of America. Now we've got the commonality. What's the unique characteristic from George Washington that sets him apart? Well, he was the first president under the current Constitution to be elected president. And not only that, he was elected hands down. Nobody voted against him. Okay? Now we're ready to give our definition. We state our term. We make sure we say what group he's in, and then we give the unique characteristic. Here we go. If that little thing will get out of the way. George Washington was the first president under the current Constitution and is the only president elected anonymously. All right, so that's how you do definition. And you're going to practice this week with our issue of algebra in defining terms. Now, the next question is, okay, great. I've learned how to give my term. Now, where do I put it in my essay? The answer to that is wherever it fits the best. You may want to put it as background information up in the introduction, depending on how your paper's flowing or your issue. You may want to put it in the division section and discuss how that's the point of disagreement, is the definition of the term itself. You may also want to use it in your proofs or if you're refuting the other side. So you really can put it anywhere in your essay that makes the most sense for your thoughts. Let's look at some mentor texts. Let's look at some essays related to this issue of is algebra important? And let's see if they use definition and where they used it. I want you to please, please, please pause this video, read the excerpt, and then try to identify where you think the definition was used, if used at all. Go ahead, pause now. Okay, so did you find in this article about the rebuttal on is algebra necessary? So this comes as a rebuttal, a refutation of another article that said algebra isn't necessary. Where did they define the term, or did they? And what term did they define? I love this example because they made the definition very important and they added a hook in the middle by asking the question, what is algebra anyway? And then they define it. So that's a very powerful way to use definition in the midst of a persuasive piece. Let's look at one more. This is from a math professor at Fordham University. And His whole argument was on basically what is math and why is it such a misunderstood subject. Read through the excerpt from his essay, pause the video, and see if he used the common topic of definition in his persuasive paper. Okay, his was a little more subtle, wasn't it? He still used a hook, a lead, to ask a question to really get the reader thinking. Basically, what is the definition of math, or what is math? But he used he used it more informally than the other one. And he said, what is math really like? Okay. Explaining what something is like is the same thing as telling you what it is, right? It's defining it or expressing it in a way that you can relate to. It's another way to define the term. So he also, this is a cool thing this author did. In his definition, he didn't just tell you what it was, he told you what it is not. And that is a very effective tool in discussing and informing your reader and trying to persuade somebody. Because if you can give them what it isn't, it helps to understand further than what it is. Just like we can understand hot a whole lot more when we really understand what cold is. If we had no concept of cold, would we really understand hot? So those are two examples of using definition very eloquently, very well, and with very strong effect. And I want you to keep looking at good writing. And I want you to imitate it. The first step to becoming a good writer is becoming a good imitator. Then that's how Benjamin Franklin learned to write well, is he imitated and imitated. Once you start imitating somebody who's doing something well, then after a lot of practice at imitation, then you start coming into your own and being able to do it your own way and in your own style. And you're able to do it well because you've learned by a mentor. That's why I call these mentor texts. Okay, so we know what definition is. We know we're in invention. Let's just review what our issue is going to be for this week. Well, actually for 3 weeks. Our issue for Essay 5 is, basically, is algebra even necessary? That's the question. Whether algebra is essential for life and therefore a needed requirement for high school and college. You have resources in your praxis. So here's the steps we're going to take for the week. And they're laid out in detail in praxis, but I just wanted to preview it with you in today's lesson. Today, you're going to use the resource links in praxis and other sources you find that you may like better. And you're going to do research on both sides of the topic. Okay? I want a minimum of 3 resources. So again, you can just use the ones I've given, but if you don't like them or there's other links and maybe they don't really go on the side you're already thinking about, you can find other resources. But you're going to research that today. Give yourself a time frame and you're going to take notes. You can use flashcards. You can use your computer. It does not matter to me, but I need notes. That's the first process. And make sure you write a bibliography for each source you use. We're going to start learning how to do a cited works page. You need that information. Then the next day, you're going to start to create your Annie chart. And you guys are very familiar with that now. A affirms, N negates, and then I is interesting, and that's where our common topics go of comparison and now definition. But what I want you to do, since we haven't really practiced it yet, is when you fill out your A and your N, when you go to fill out your I part of the chart, I want you to go to your Lost Tools of Writing workbook. I want you to go to page 51 and fill out that guided worksheet on how to define your term. Okay? So you're going to have to pick a term that you think is going to be important for your paper to define. Once you've done that, you're going to put it in your eye chart. Okay, so transfer the important information from page 51 into the eye portion of your chart. The next day or the next phase, you're going to move anything that's relevant in that eye portion of your chart to wherever it fits in the A or the N, the affirm or the negate of the issue. Okay, so in those columns. Then you go through the process we've been working on for several cycles now. You start to group those items under A into similar categories, okay? So you'll look at the things you listed, and the ones that are similar, you're going to start to use a symbol to code. So you may use a plus symbol, and all those things you've listed that are very similar, that could fit in that little neat little subgroup, you put a plus sign, okay? Then you go on to the next, and anything that goes to this other little subgroup, you'll come up with another symbol for. It's very important that you try to have bare minimum at least 3 subgroups in your A column and in your N column. And if you can't, then you need to go back and think more about what affirms and what negates, okay? Those symbols groups, you're then going to give them a name. You're going to look at a big commonality they all share and make that the category name. Okay? Finally, you're going to look at the affirming side and the negating side, and you're going to decide which side of the debate you're on. No middle of the road. You've got to pick a side. That's when you then create your thesis, and you pick the 3 strongest subcategories or proofs, those groups, to use for your paper. And then you'll be ready for next week to go into your arrangement and outlining your awesome paper. And I'm hoping that we're going to get to use media to publish these once we've got them all cleaned up and ready to go. I want you to get used to different genres of writing, like blogging or posters, or even like a debate online source. I want you to be able to manipulate the different avenues where you can express yourself in writing. So we'll look at that in a couple weeks. And that's the end of your lesson today. Go jump in on your research. Make sure you check Praxis for the detailed directions. And I will talk to you guys later, and I will see you on Tuesday. Have a great day.